good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the last session of the day. And there she is, Dr. LaTisha Bader. Dr. Bader is a licensed psychologist, addiction counselor, and certified medical performance consultant.
Let's do it. Look, we don't need an introduction. If you can hear me, let's get going. So y'all, this is a fun place for me to get to be all of the things that I am. So thanks for the introduction, but I'm going to tell you why A, I'm like easily excitable, and B, kind of why I'm in front of you, potentially doing a different talk. If you've seen my name before, I've spoken openly and frequently about women and weed. That's one of the things is that I find that substances are gender inclusive, but they are not gender neutral. And so it took a whole long way to figure out why cannabis is doing different things for women. But I am actually the CMPC part that was mentioned is I actually am a sports psychologist. And that's how I get in front of you today. As I was a trained sports psychologist, I wanted to do sports psychology. And when people would get behind closed doors and we were talking about all the things I was ready to talk about, like attentional focus, right, and grit and goal setting and progressive muscle relaxation and sport performance, all the things I wanted to do, y'all, we were talking about substances. Like 8 out of 10, even collegiate athletes, were talking about their use of mind, mood altering substances to bring them up, get them down, go to sleep. I'm going to coach you into different words to use for athletes. And so I have to tell you, that is actually how I got in front of, that's actually how I got into the work for addiction and substance use, is I was working with athletes and figured out that it's a tough job if you start your sport at the age of 4 or 5 in order to have a peak performance every single day for like the next 20 years or 30 years of your life. And if I'm already getting head nods from the people that are still in the Zoom room with me, that's the journey that I want you to take with me today. We're going to talk about the impact of cannabis specifically on sport performance. And so, y'all, we have talked mental health, we have talked safety, we have talked violence. But what I love about learning, about flipping a topic on its head, is that if we can learn a different perspective, we can kind of teach it and coach it into a different place. And so some of us, you know, we don't have to go marijuana, we don't have to go reefer madness in order to have a aversive message for substances. We just have to set the facts. We don't have to do fear. And so I'm kind of known for, I call them like Baderisms. That's what they call me. They call my little quotable quotes at work. But I want to put the first one in your notebook. I want you to be able to understand what the difference when I say subtle is significant, especially when it comes to sport. And I hope I can use the next 50 minutes to kind of talk about what that means for y'all. Y'all, let's go on a ride together and we can do this. I'm a PowerPoint dependent. I don't apologize for that because I love talking it and then seeing it. So we're going to go on the journey, but I'm going to ask you a probing question first. By the time that you make it to the place that you are, and y'all, we are all performers. And if you can hear that, be like, Bader. I'm like, I know my performance used to be, kicking a ball. And actually I was the goalkeeper. So I was catching a projectile coming at my face for that reason, that made me successful. But by the time that we renorm ourselves and we go from like good to better and better to best, and we're at a collegiate level for sport, we're at a professional level for sport, we're at an elite level for sport. And I really get to work with all the way up to Olympics, all the way to baseball, football, you name it, cycling, mountain biking, swimmers, golfers, and fencing. So all of the stuff, all of the work that I get to do, I'm talking to people where literally we're just competing against ourselves. But the margin for success and the margin for error by the time that I get to the people that I'm talking to is often centimeters, millimeters, or seconds. When we're talking track and field and we're talking sprinting, y'all, we literally are fractions of seconds into good to better and better to best, and or you go home and you don't make a podium. And so that's what I ask you first. By the time that we get here, all I want to do is ask you a very simple, benign question. And of the 147 people that are left today, I want you to note the last time that you used a mind mood altering substance. We don't have to be shameful about it. And if you're still right, as if the gentleman told you to fill it up, if you're gulping your caffeine, note the time. If you've hit the vape while we've been talking, or if you hit it at the top of the hour, right, just note the time, note the time. I use this approach. And so I'm going to kind of get off and tell you the things that I use that work, especially with adolescents, but definitely with athletes. We are primed machines. By the time that we perfect our performance routines, listen to this, we have a performance routine, we have a pre-performance routine, we have a sleep routine, a sleep hygiene routine, we have a travel routine, we have a nutrition routine. We are even clocked and timed that we can time our bowel movements. We are honed instruments. And as a sports psychologist, that's often all I'm doing. As I'm taking your routine, I'm kind of assessing it and I'm troubleshooting. And so when I say that subtle becomes significant, that's what I talk about is a lot of routines. I just talk about what you put in your routine, what you're getting out of it, and what it's going to be. And so I think about this. This is my next quotable quote when we get in there, and I'm jumping the gun a little bit. But I say, if you have to recover from your recovery routine, you're slower than I am. Right? So if you do something, if you put something into your recovery routine for pain management, for sleep, for relaxation, that your body and your brain have to recover from, you're already slower than the woman next to you or the man next to you. So just kind of keep that in mind. So we start with, when was the last time that you used a mind mood altering substance? We know that for cannabis, and I don't wake up in the morning and like resent the Jack Daniels family for adding substance to sport, because but where there's sports, there's substances. And we know that, like from day one, when we talk about Olympic Games, we were already doping in the first Olympic Games, right? And they were already selling mead and fermented beverages to the people in the Coliseum when we were watching spectacles. But when we talk about athletes of today, that's what we know. We know we have consumers of cannabis, and whether it's coming through our ultra marathoners, like our hockey players, right? Basketball, pick a league. I'm not gonna get into politics too much. In this, I'm gonna flirt with it a little bit, but I gotta let you know, it kind of doesn't matter whether, and we've known that for cannabis, whether we legalize it or not. It doesn't matter if the substance is illegal or illegal when I talk sport. When we talk about tobacco, nicotine, alcohol, legal substances all day long, right? Caffeine. We have many, many conversations about caffeine and about sugar in my world as a sports psychologist, right? Even just basic nutrition. We have a lot of conversations about water, but it really is when we get down to this understanding, athletes, professional athletes, all kinds of athletes are potentially choosing to put cannabis into their routines. And we just kind of want to know why. So that's what we're going to explore and investigate today. The NCAA has put out a survey. They do it for the National Studies on Substance Use Habits for collegiate athletes. I do have to let you know that due to the pandemic, this 3-year cycle has been disrupted. They got it last year. They got the data set last year. We should get some new publications pretty soon. But the last time that they surveyed NCAA students, they said that they were using cannabis, but only about a quarter, right? Only about maybe like 28, you could see like to the 33% and starting to go up. Don't be surprised that the numbers are going to go up. And we learned that from the presenters earlier today. As soon as we have access to the drug, we will use it, right? And it doesn't matter if it's the black market or the legit market, the recreational market, or the medicinal market. Although y'all have never sat in front of an athlete and talked about medicinal Jack Daniels. So I just want to throw that into your bucket there, is that it's mind mood altering, and that's where we stop. And I grabbed that language from like NA, right? Like it doesn't matter what it's doing, but it's altering your mind and your mood. When we surveyed collegiate athletes, they said when we use, of the people that were using, about 77% said they were doing for social reasons. The rest said kind of pain management. Y'all, that is really going to flip in the next couple of years. And that's not because of the consumers. It's going to be because of the industry. So remember, we're not talking about getting high anymore when it comes to cannabis. We're talking about getting well. And that is a marketing campaign throughout the sports industry, and why it's getting into the hands of athletes more and more, both THC and CBD, right? So we're not in trouble for it, and we don't like getting in trouble as athletes, right? So the punitive part's kind of coming out, but it's been positioned in our lives as athletes because it's going to be part of us getting well, part of our recovery routine, our relaxation routine, and how we restore. But y'all, that's not why we're using it. We're still using it for social reasons. So I threw a couple studies up there just to let y'all know. Currently, we know it's the most commonly used illicit substance. We know a large fraction of the US is using it as adults. We are still at that NCAA kind of number. About 1 in 4 collegiate athletes are using it. If you survey elite level international athletes, and so if we kind of go across the nation, those numbers drop quickly depending on sport as well. And then I threw in a little CBD numbers too, because they did some really great surveys with rugby players, cyclists, and triathletes. And there is a little bit of mix and match when it comes to the sport itself, as well as the drug. And I didn't put it on here, but I do gotta let you know, I want to let you know that there are some sports in particular that are drawn towards cannabis. Bless it, it's a lacrosse of all sports. Soccer is in there, we get up high. Swimmers are in there, we get up high for kind of cannabis use. It's our drug of choice when we get in there. And then the position can actually even change. So welcome to the quarterbacks, the leaders of the team. They're more known for binge drinking as well, and then for using substances such as cannabis. So it differs by sport. It also differs by position. And so I just got to let you know, just ask. That's going to be one of the questions that we put into this like intelligent cannabis conversation at the end. But what I want to let you know is the truth. So when I was in locker rooms, even as recent as last month, and I took my own little LaTisha survey of it, I actually asked the front office, and I was in a professional baseball organization. And I asked the front office, how many people do you think that you're using? 80% of them, they voted that about 80% of the players were using, at least on a monthly basis. And then I went and asked the staff, the ones that have direct access, and they said that about the same. It's going to be like 75, 80%. And then I asked the clubhouse. And it was really funny because it was about the same. So y'all were using cannabis, but it's funny. The reports are often that everyone's using, but in truth, many people aren't. And we're using when and how, for what reasons. And so that's what I'm going to bring to you today. Some of that science that we can talk to athletes about what it's doing to our performance. But what I want you to really put into your bucket today is to think about is just because you're coming with this perception of whatever it is, no one's using cannabis, everyone's using cannabis, the young, the old, I want you to just throw it out. I want you to ask everybody, because I think sometimes you would be surprised, because a female ultra marathoner right now, we probably know would pick it up more than potentially a hockey player. So all of that profiling, all of the stigmatization, all of the sort of biases that you think might come along with cannabis use, please set it down. And we're just going to ask everybody really neutrally and openly, are you using it? How are you using it? What does it help for? And then we're going to get the true answer. So that's why I say, put the perceptions down, just start asking, because it's totally inclusive. We have older athletes that are using it for certain reasons, like for the OLDs, right? For our little owies and aches and pains, all the way down to younger athletes, for all of the things that the industry has promised us that cannabis can do for us as athletes. But I want to let you know this. More often than not, substances get introduced to an athlete's regimen, that routine, often innocently. And what happens, and again, y'all know this, so it's like often we just need something. We need relief. We need energy. Y'all, we are on the road, and if you are playing baseball, your schedule is insane. If you're an umpire, it's worse. Then you have no home clubhouse. You don't have anywhere to go to. You are living in hotels, doing this traveling lifestyle, and you have a need. You want to be social, you want to sleep, you want to do something, and substances get introduced right there. Now we have these beautiful brains, especially as athletes. And I do joke, I say an addict brain and an athlete brain is not that far apart, because if 1 is good, 2 is better, and 3 is a championship, right? But we have these beautiful brains that are often predisposed for that same pleasure seeking and that same intensity that we really do love. And we see that those dopamine hits that we see with substance use, that's the same brain that an athlete holds. So we need it and we get it. We get relief, we get sleep. For some of us, immediately, we're like a one-time learner, or we have the best game of our life, right? And maybe we're superstitious or superstitious, right? But if I smoked the night before the game and then I pitched a no-hitter, be careful. I probably have a routine already. But we needed something and we got it. And our brains figured out that it worked. So we're going to do it again. And as soon as we start to put it into our pattern, especially as athletes, we are building routines all the time. it will become a pattern. We will have tolerance, withdrawal, and then we're often just chasing that homeostasis again. And so that's just kind of my watered down version to try to talk to athletes about this cycle of addiction and how it kind of gets into our world. I give them 2 Latin terms quickly, and we try to do it. So I know y'all can't vote. I would love for you to do it. But we get this concept down really quickly. No matter what we do to ourselves as athletes, it really can only be ergogenic or ergolytic. And sometimes I love when life is simple. So things that enhance our performance as athletes are ergogenic. And I usually put a thumbs up and I get them to vote thumbs up. And then I say ergolytic, things that impair our athletic performance, thumbs down. So if you were voting with me, do it quickly. Broccoli. Got it. Potatoes. That's a thumbs up, by the way. That's a secret, right? But potatoes fried with cheese, covered in bacon and pulled pork, which is how I like to eat fries, right? So that turns it ergolytic, something that will not help my performance. That is literally how I go about my day. Hey, what are you doing? Helpful? Hurts. Helpful? Keeps you stuck. What is it? And then I put the substances up here. So I have a sorry, not sorry. If your drug of choice is on here and it is ergolytic, I promise you it will not ever help. And so if alcohol is one of them, I have a different talk. You can follow me for that one. Although we love our alcohol, that is only disruptive to an athlete's body. It dehydrates, it messes with our digestive system for 36 to 72 hours. It causes lactic acid and cramping. I can go on and on. THC is on there. We're going to talk about why the importance of potency is on there, because that is why athletes say it works. Because there's some aspects that what we love as athletic performance is that when this THC locks into our brains and our bodies, sometimes it's helping us do some things. But again, it is not ergogenic, right? Because most often it's kind of numbing us. You see the other substances that are on here? Anything that I inhale or smoke or vape, and I do this to you or near you, is to let you know it's my number one argument that I have for young people. I said, hey, just because it's not fire, right? Traditional analog cigarettes, that's what they're called, analog vintage. Just because it's fire doesn't mean it's not heat. And we're going to talk about the importance of esophagus and cardiovascular health. Even my upper respiratory, right, is going to get in the way of me being an athletic, get in the way of my athletic performance right now. But anything that's inhaled, smoked, or vaped inside is going to really mess with my cardiovascular abilities. Opiates, benzos, and amphetamines when misused. I just do this to try to get individual sports versus team sports. Please find your drug of choice on here as well, and know that it's not just hurting you. It's not just impairing you. This harm to others is the dark blue, and we can see that alcohol all the way to heroin, crack cocaine. Not that we would normally see that, right, in our athletic performances, but cannabis has a harm to others and a harm to self-impact, because it really is that part where what I do affects the people around me. So let's get straight to performance, and y'all, I cut to the chase. I have to tell you the P and the 2 P's that go together is this performance and potency. I know we've touched on potency, and I kind of double checked to see how much we're going to belabor it, but I'm going to do my little history lesson for y'all. So potency is just like this, right? We know early, the Chinese emperor, that's our very first time that we find cannabis occurring in the natural world, in the natural state. His potency was 0.03% THC. Remember the stuff that gets you high. So if you are an emperor, right, the coolest of the cool, I usually use that for athletes, right? Because of like the emperor got the good stuff. It was 0.03% potency. I'm usually by some kind of a field with grass. And my joke is we could probably go out there, grab some of that grass, put it in a bowl, and get higher than that Chinese emperor. And I get a lot of good laughs because it's true. We have enough chemicals on our agricultural products now that it is insane what we would do to our brains and our bodies. Track that cannabis over time, and you can see that we became better gardeners, right? So then the next number I want you to remember is that 0.3%. And we know that 0.3% THC is what we all are going to agree on is hemp. And the US government says it's an agricultural product, much like kale. But look, this hemp has a mind mood altering substance in it. It's a 0.3% THC, but it can change our mind and our mood. As THC begins to increase over time, and this is just for plant, remember we industrialized this. It is a for-profit substance that we put in front of each other. And so cannabis, we got better at producing a plant with higher and higher potencies. We can get plants up now to about 45% THC. And I do belabor that point. Because if you don't know how to explain potency to an athlete or an adolescent or anybody that just doesn't understand the intensity of a drug, I usually stop right now and give kind of an alcohol reference. When I say the alcohol, right, is we know that's potency, is that we use the word proof. And we talk about that. And I said, so I usually kind of lean over and I'm like, hey, you, me, and Dale are going to have a good night tonight. And I'm going to bring 3 White Claw. And I usually get a pretty good giggle. And I was like, okay, you don't party like that. I was like, well, how about then you party like I do, which is I'm going to bring 2 handles of Everclear or 151, you pick. And even professional, as in they make way more commas and zeros than I have ever thought about my entire life, go, whoa. That is understanding the intensity of a drug. Y'all figure out your way to explain that to an athlete quickly, right? Because what's in this cup is very different. And if I have to recover from what's in that cup, right, that makes for a different day. If I have 6 Everclears and try to practice the next day, or if I have 2 White Claws, it's a very different performance. It's a very different impact on my performance, even though they would still be classified as alcohol. Cannabis is the same. Our bodies, our brains, our collagen, everything about us has to recover from the intensity of the drug, and it would take longer. And look, if you're slower than me, I'm probably going to try to take your spot. We go back to the potency of cannabis, right? So we get plant-based up to 45%. And y'all, that's with its athletics. And if you're around athletes, we don't mess around with skunk way. Like we don't mess around with anything amateur. Like when we go, because that's what happens with athletics too, is that we often have about 8 hours to relax. We have 1 day off in order to like live a normal life that everybody else gets to be social at. Like when I'm playing the game, you're drinking at my game, right? But then when I get my day off or my half day off, I have to figure out how to relax as hard as I can. And we often aren't practiced in that way. So that's also what athletes are doing. We're running those algorithms and we're going to try to have a good time or live a normal life for a short period of time. And we're going to do it in a very intense way. That's what pilots do, right? They have a rule. It's called bottle to throttle. And you're not supposed to drink or use 8 hours before you go to work. That time frame doesn't bother me because coaches do that too, right? Don't drink or use 24 hours before a game. But I'm watching the behavior of what they do about 9 hours before. If you're finishing up your 4% beer, right, before the bottle to throttle happens, I'm probably not worried about you. If you're slamming shots, right, 15 minutes before the bar closes, that's probably the person I'm talking to. Again, that's that intensity of the drug and the frequency of it. But y'all, we're really good. We're great Americans. We didn't stop there. So we took this plant. And if y'all didn't know that, we actually had to reclassify this drug. We haven't had to reclassify a drug, I would almost say in forever, but it's probably not true. But alcohol has always been a biphasic drug. It has 2 phases. The first one's euphoric, right? And then the next one is the depressant. It's a sedative. It's always my joke too, why I call it happy hour and not happy day. It doesn't last for forever. But cannabis is now, it's a stimulant, a depressant, a hallucinogen, and a narcotic. 4 ways that this drug can be found to mind, mood, alter us. And then we didn't stop there because we have our sativas, our indicas, our hybrids. Y'all, we can go up, down, and around any way that we want to move this plant and have it interact with our bodies. Flavor notes, the entourage effect, you get the whole thing. So it's become a very classy product to buy. They ask us a lot about our preferences. But we didn't stop there. And I have to be honest, this is kind of like why it makes a lot of sense to my athletic brain. Because if you were drinking a beer, right, and you had 95 calories and you drank your beer and it only got you like this drunk, that would seem silly to my brain, right? If you could drink 20 calories and get really drunk, why wouldn't you choose that? And so that's what athlete brains are doing too. And so what we find a lot is that athletes will kind of move to concentrates. And we know that, right? So we took the plant and we concentrated it down. We kind of juiced it, if you will. That's actually how I explain it to athletes because they have $20,000 juicing machines. That's actually a professional NFL team had a $20,000 orange juice machine in their nutrition station, but you get 8 or 12 oranges in one glass of orange juice. And they go, oh yeah, because if one's good, two's better. 10 is actually a real glass of orange juice. So we start to understand concentrates. And if y'all look at this, right, these are like 2016 kind of colors and grit. What I want to get your attention up at the top corner. A dab, and not the dorky dance that comes along with sport, right? But a dab is when we take a hot knife, take something hot, right, and dab it into the material and then combust it. That is 7 joints in one hit. But that combustion, that science experiment that is happening, that's like 700 to 900 degrees right in my face, although it's odorless and colorless, right? And it doesn't feel like fire, is that the science experiment of turning that solid into a vapor into my lungs, right, is happening right in front of my face. So I talk about that especially for athletes, because we're starting to learn about the dehydration rates of it. And so we talk about that like a kind of that 1-to-1 ratio. If we're drinking alcohol, we have to rehydrate, right? 1-to-1 for water. But we're getting some really good numbers to understand how dehydrating that vaping or smoking analog, but mostly even vaping, is getting us. And so as an athlete, I'm talking about that. You are drying yourself out from your nose all the way down through your throat, through your mouth, right through your lungs, even into your stomach, is that we're pulling hydration from our bodies each and every time that we hit that vape. Right now, we're trying to find some numbers, but it could be up to like a 10-to-1 ratio, like 10 units of water. You can't see my water that I'm consuming, but like 10 units of water for this vaping exercise that we have, or vaping that we do. And if y'all have been around athletics long enough, they're about the only people that their water jugs are milk gallons, and they are challenged often to consume as many ounces of water as they possibly can during the day in order to stay hydrated. This is a conversation that we have. Just the activity of vaping and smoking, how dehydrating it is. But don't worry, this looks a little gross and gritty, so stick with me, right? So it got cleaner. Although when we tested these drugs, we knew 80% of them were contaminated with weeds and pesticides, mold, fungus, a multisyllabic chemical that I tried to say in front of an NFL team and botched it. And a gentleman in the back said it really quickly because it was a pool chemical and I couldn't pronounce it. But that's what was in one of the concentrates that we had tested for that month. And I had pulled some studies for it. So yeah, we talk about like the organic nature of how we're going to try to take care of our bodies, especially as athletes. Y'all, sometimes we get down to like eating boiled chicken and broccoli to make weight, and very much concerned about all of the chemicals that we are putting in our bodies. And then in the next moment, our drugs are contaminated. So you can use that as an argument as well. But I try to get people's mindset to say, this is the cannabis of today. This is the cannabis that most athletes are interacting with, is some type of a concentrate, usually delivered in some type of a pen or dab form, because it's quick, it's intense, it's odorless, it's colorless, and we're not getting caught on the bus for that. So if people are still smoking plant and traditional like flower or bud, it's probably still kind of those social reasons for it. They have a routine. These are the products of today. So I will tell you, we have plants and concentrates and distillates and tinctures and edibles and topicals. And actually, if you knew anything, I helped write some of the NFL policy, the Players Association policy. And one of their concerns was that they were getting massages. That's why they were testing positive for THC. They were getting massages, and those are astute, very large gentlemen. They were getting a lot of massages, but the topicals they were using for like CBD or THC, and that's why they were testing positive. That's actually why they raised one of their limits for the nanograms per milliliter in their testing policy for just exposure. But y'all, you see my eye roll. I'm like, okay, we get it. But it is there. We talk all products that we can, especially for athletes. And we're going to note a little bit for CBD. But let's get into it. But y'all, we're using any kind of products, cannabis infused beverages, concentrates. That's actually a lady's choice. Love the cannabis infused beverages, but however you can take it in, we're going to take it in. But when I talk to athletes, this is where I get the most focus. So if you've disassociated, come on back. When I'm talking THC in the brain, I talk a lot about where the CB1 receptors are in the brain and this lock and key mechanism. And even if it's subtle, it is significant. Because if you are a baseball player and there's 100-mile-an-hour projectile coming at you, and you have to read TAU, T-A-U, right? That's the ability to swing the bat on a level playing field while you hold. Now, that is a very complicated process in order to get a paycheck. So I will tell you, hands down, at least for 24 hours at a time, THC slows your reaction time. It impairs your memory, hard to memorize playbooks. It impairs your judgment and your attention. And I know you're like, okay, thanks, Bader. But look, if you're doing algebra and calculus, reaction time isn't the difference between you going home in an ambulance and you going home with a championship trophy. But it is in my world. We often talk milliseconds, right? We talk about millimeters and inches. But if you are a receiver coming across the middle, trying to judge a ball, the player, yourself, your 10 fingers, right? And then the quarterback, and watch the rotating seams on a ball, like think about all of the things that are going into your performance each day. I need every single second. It distorts depth perception. It slows neuronal activity. That's the stopwatch, y'all. And I tell them, like, hey, if you're going to do anything, just please know that the drug that you put in your body, however you put it in, even if we eat it, right, or smoke it, is that it's going to slow neuronal activity for 24 hours. And that could be great if you're looking to relax for a day. But if you have half a day to recover and you're back to practice on Sunday, being hungover or slow is not helpful for your job sustainability. It distorts perceptions and impairs memories. Again, they have some studies that are coming out. I'm very excited about. I hope that they get published because I actually know they're doing them. Is that athletes are doing activities high, and then they're getting judged by their performance, kind of like, if you will, by a coach. And then they're getting the perception of if the athlete thought they did a great job, and then they're getting scrutinized by like a coach or a recruiter for that. And what the joke is most often is that the athlete will be like, man, I had a great practice. And the coach is like, that was not great. That alone, that distortion of perception is what I like to talk about, that difference in my like coachability, but my perception. If I think I'm a great dancer on the dance floor and then I have 6 drinks and I think I'm a much better dancer, but like y'all, TikTok doesn't agree with me, right? So even my perception is distorted, but that is not changing the reality. It decreases fine motor coordination, especially in the hands and the eyes. And pretty much most of sport relies on that. It inhibits sweating and the ability to balance our body's temperature. And again, if you're an average Joe and you're just like doing your thing, that's probably not important. But for those of us doing 2-a-days, heat stroke, I mean, you name it, lactic acid buildup to it, like playing ball in Arizona, where we are literally like every little unit is trying to stay cool and collected and not overheating. It's important for our performance. I belabor. Fatigue is going to be there, anaerobic fatigue. We're going to see some power changes. We're going to see some cardiovascular changes, and even just this heart rate. And y'all, chronic smokers, especially chronic smokers really do tell me this continues to happen no matter what, even if they smoked for years. And so as an athlete, we are honestly trying to learn skills every day to manage our heart rate, that heart rate variability. And even our sleep number beds are trying to tell us when we're doing it well and when we stink at it. If I added 20 to 50 beats per heart rate for 2 to 3 hours, that's the impact of cannabis. That could change my performance. So this is the rest of us. THC in the body is pretty important, especially when it comes to athletic performance. And these are the ones that I know I really get into when we talk to athletes. It used to be a vasodilator. We kind of knew that from low potency cannabis, but now, unbeknownst to us, and we're trying to get a lot of medical people to help us understand, it's now a vasoconstrictor, not helping with blood flow, especially when we need that for performance. That cardiovascular part comes back, difficulties taking in oxygen. Like literally, and I live in Colorado, and taking in oxygen at altitude is in of itself a challenge. when you think about that. So I usually tell athletes not to do anything else that makes it difficult to breathe. Heart attacks, strokes, healthy young men. We have the science to confirm that they are more at risk for heart attacks and strokes, even with no previous history. But I get people to focus on the last ones. Because again, if you have a different job, I'm fine with you. But if you need strength and balance in your world, and think about y'all, if y'all don't know that, like when they work on balance and the rest of us are like using a medicine ball that's solid, Major League Baseball is using a medicine ball that's filled with water, because that's how much core control they have to have, right? That's how much to be able to move every single body and have like balance. Think about gymnastics, think about cycling. We think about this, right? For cannabis, we're 2 times more likely to have a motor vehicle accident, but we're 9 times more likely to have a bicycle accident, right? Because that's proprioception. That's that fancy word for balance. Cannabis increases sway. And again, what's funny on a Saturday night when you're like high with your friends and you're like, that is dangerous in sport. If I cannot maintain my balance and use every bit, right, to push, shove, hit, swing, I'm at a loss for my performance. And then we're learning these a lot. These studies come from a lot of cycling studies, running studies. Our new generation of athletic performance in cannabis is being tested, and they're really finding that we have a reduced ability to maintain effort and max capacity. And if y'all don't know power numbers, think about cyclists. But I do want to let you know my historical little moment here is when I first started this gig and researching cannabis and athletes. There was only 5 studies that were even published at all. One of them only had 10 people in them, but each and every study was done with a diseased population, like like they couldn't breathe, and that they had the cannabis and they were going to run. This is not the athlete of today. So my whole point to tell y'all is we do not have enough research to strongly say one way or the other. I start to give this research because it's finally robust. From 2014 to 2018 to 2020 to 2022, we're starting to get people to research actual physical activity with healthy people, and starting to really notice that this impairment, right, the ergolytic nature of cannabis is what's being brought to us as athletes. All right, don't give up on me yet, because there's some orthopedic surgeons that are pretty pissed off right now too. So THC in the body in particular comes this way. What we're seeing is that there's a decreased bone density. So athletes actually might have a chronic cannabis users actually might have a lower BMI, right? They because that's what happens. So we start to choose our substance over our nutrition. That's just normal substance use talk, is that I'll drink rather than eat, and I'll smoke rather than eat. But that is going to decrease our bone density, putting it more at risk for fractures. If we're consuming cannabis, we are actually slowing our healing of tendons, ligaments, and bones. I can't give you the study yet, but we know, especially in NFL and NBA, they're tracking return to play. And there's some pissed off orthopedic surgeons because we're coming back to play about 10 to 11% later. And they're wondering if smoking, or cannabis in particular, the use of cannabis and smoking, is delaying that. And you can hear one of the podcast talking head guys talk about that. I don't give you these studies until they're evidence-based, and at least we have 2 or 3 studies to confirm it. So we know this. It is slowing the healing of tendons, ligaments, and bones, and that is slowing us down as athletes. When we talk about pain perception, I do want to let you know that a lot of athletes say that they will use for pain management. And I talk a lot about pain when I talk to athletes, but I really do think about it this way. This is what the studies tell us. There is a change in the perception of pain. Doesn't mean it's not healing, but like if my wrist hurts, right, but then I'm kind of numb to it, I might feel better. But, that's what we talk about. It's often careful, especially with our runners, is that if I'm disconnected from my body, if I'm not attuned to the messages that my body is giving me about pain and pain reception, I actually might play through an injury. I might play through something, right? My body is kind of telling me this doesn't feel okay. And although that makes us big and tough and we might make it through the game, I actually might play through some small injuries and turn them into larger injuries. That's why we talk a lot about pain and pain management. I actually got to sit down with a recognizable name, if I could say it, and I can't. And he would tell his players that he's like, y'all, when I'm hurt, I totally get off cannabis. And they're like, why? That seems like the exact time I would want to smoke. And he goes, no. He said, when I'm high, I can feel everything. And so it did change his perception of pain and actually amplified it. We have a lot of athletic trainers that are talking about athletes that are using during the training room time, right, with rehabbing injuries, that they're actually more sensitive to the interventions that are being done. I like to call it, and because I'm being recorded, I'm sure, but one trainer called it the symptoms of weenie butt. So it's like these weenie butt guys, and I don't know what that's about. And it was often the people that were using cannabis during their pain management efforts, but that we're making our body more sensitive. It decreases our pain threshold. That's what we know to be true, often requiring then more medication when we move on to it. We might even move on to abuse of opioids because of this pain threshold. So there is some moderate analgesic for neuropathic, that's the nerve pain, but most of our athletes aren't dealing with nerve pain. We're dealing with bones, ligaments, and muscle. And so to kind of think about that way. We talk sleep. Y'all, we talk sleep a lot, especially as athletes. And we know our sleep study guys. I'm going to leave that to the scientists that talk about it. But when I coach people in to talk about how are we using substance and sleep, I just make sure to coach into one place. Falling asleep is called sleep latency. And that's what the academic tells us, is that many substances do help with sleep latency. Y'all, that's right. Substances help us pass out. They help us go to sleep. They do not often help us stay asleep. And that's really where we get our restorative sleep as an athlete, when we can move from that 3rd to 4th REM cycle and really have our body relax, right? And our muscles and our tension in our body can stop, and we can soothe and restore ourselves. So thinking about it that way, it can help you get to sleep, but it doesn't always help us stay asleep or get restorative sleep when we're in our sleep cycles. And we have sleep experts that are helping us try to get 15 minutes at a time, right? So just think about that when we're coaching our athletes into it. And most of the time when we're using cannabis for sleep, we're going to disrupt our sleep cycles anyway. That can actually lead to sleep disorders for that part. I also do this. This is not on the slides, so listen. If you think about it, also, I have to take my sleep hygiene on the road. I have to take my nutrition hygiene on the road. And so I say, if you're taking your medicine or you're taking your sleep hygiene, that includes cannabis, on the road, can you literally go from state to state and get what you need for your sleep? Can you go from country to country and sort of get what you need? Or can you not have a felony, right, when we go to a different country? And I do make this point of, like, Brittany Griner took her medicine to Russia and was incarcerated for it. So if we think about that just for pain management or sleep routines, I'm like, no shame in the game, but can you take your routine with you? Can you travel in the NFL from here to Europe and play? Can you travel to the Dominican Republic? Can you travel, right? If you are an international athlete, can you move about the country, and can you move about the globe with your routine? If it has something in it that's not like a silk pillowcase, what are you going to do with that? And that's the conversations that we have in my office all the time. I know we've done THC in the mind, so I'm not going to belabor it, but I just want to let you know, especially for athletes, many times we are self-medicating some kind of a mental health concern. So I tell athletes, this is ergolytic all the time when it talks about mental health. It worsens anxiety. It can cause acute anxiety. It can cause paranoia. And y'all, I have never had to consult other sports psychologists about psychosis until the last 10 years of my career. I have people calling from the Olympics down to adolescent athletes talking about psychosis, and it is not unheard of to have people hands up. The last locker room that I surveyed was 60% of the people, 60% of the players had already had somebody that they loved and cared about have a psychotic episode when it comes to cannabis. So talk about it. You really got to understand what that means, because it is the new concern that we have to deal with. And y'all, like, we're doing sport performance, and now we're talking psychosis. And that is like a super healthy young 18 or 19-year-old that is now on an antipsychotic, potentially for their life. This is not what we were dealing with in sport even 10 years ago. Now, if I scared you a little, I didn't mean to, I don't have to, I'm just giving you the facts. But I want to give you one thing that I talk about for some of the studies that I extrapolate from this like experimental clinical pharmacology kind of place, more of like the clinical psychology part into sport. Cannabis, what we learn, really disrupts some emotional regulation, some emotional attunement. And that might not mean a lot to you. And it means a lot to the athletes and to our coaches. So coaches and athletes battle all the time with this like feedback loop, right? Where I'm like, I got to let you know that didn't go well. I got to let you know that went well. I got to let you know that didn't go well. You see my feedback loop, right? Again. With coaches and athletes and staff and other colleagues and players, we are continuously in a feedback loop. It happens way more than it happens in regular work life, right? Because most of us don't give this much feedback to each other like every day or within 6 seconds, because that's how long an NFL coach gets to have to call a play. So very quickly, I have to let you know, yes, no, that sucked, right? What happens with cannabis is it's going to decrease our emotional regulation. I don't think anybody's surprised by that. A study that came out in 2021, I'm using very much, Mackenzie and Cervenka, I'm going to mess up the name, talked about this. It influences anxiety in fearful situations. You know, when you have 90,000 people screaming at you to make a kick, that's a fearful situation, right? So we think about that is that even though it is exciting, the actual coliseum, if you will, the actual play, the crowd around us, our bodies as athletes often register our performance anxiety, our performance arenas as exciting and fearful. Fritz Perls gives us a quote. He says, the difference between fear and excitement is breath. But I have to figure out if 90,000 people screaming at me is to support me or not. Cannabis is going to disrupt this process very quickly. It's going to decrease the ability to identify 3 emotions in particular: happiness, sadness, and anger. That is going to disrupt my coachability. I'm like, hey, good job. Hey, come on. Like, think about some of the feedback that we do. It's really going to mess with this coachability, my feedback loop. And I say that especially for an athlete, that's going to make me way less coachable, because instead of giving you an accurate response to your feedback, I'm going to probably give you a face that looks like this, where you're like, whatever. And y'all have coached that. Good God, if you're parents, you've seen that on your 7-year-old to your 27-year-old. But the face, like, that's a lot. It's also going to increase our emotional distress. And especially as a sports psychologist, my whole job is to try to help you with emotion regulation and to help you manage your mental game. So this is pretty much challenging pretty much my whole life whenever we talk about impairment. So, sorry, y'all, I got click happy. Y'all have heard the violence and the behavior through aggressiveness. Libby did a great job. I'm going to let her be fantastic for that. It happens in sport as well. Most of the time, too, our athletes are not unwell and they would not be using these medications, but our athletes go in for very quick, intense surgical procedures. And so that's one of the things I'm aware of, as I'm like, hey, the Mayo Clinic lets us know we've had a lot of post-surgical problems, post-op problems with cannabis use, blood thinners, right? Any of these medications that we're using. But look, it's going to interact negatively with very commonly used medications, especially in the sport world, right? Most of us that are playing sport aren't sick, but we use these medications, if not all the time. Sometimes we dip in and out of some of these medications, and cannabis has a very strong negative interaction. All I want you to do today is be able to have that stopwatch. So right now, if I've talked long enough, of which I have, let's just pretend, let's talk nicotine. Right now, if you vaped at the top of the hour when I started talking, you are in active withdrawal from nicotine. It happens in 45 minutes. Y'all, no practice that I've ever known has ever been that short. So if you think about it, you're already in active withdrawal from nicotine in 45 minutes. You're an active withdrawal from cannabis in about 2 to 3 hours. And y'all, some of our sports go that long, right? Like, we play football for longer than 2 hours. So this is what you start to look like in active withdrawal from cannabis: irritable, anxiety, sleep difficulties. But look, this isn't a mental health problem. This is just acute withdrawal. That's the science that I offer to athletes. all I am about is just offering of like what it does as an intoxicant and what it does when it withdraws from your body. So this is what most of us are dealing with when we're talking about the anxiety that we're treating is probably post-acute withdrawal. And so I just talk to athletes a lot about that. Is that if we can talk about a challenge later on for that. Please remember, it peaks at day 4. It lasts for about 16. We're getting a lot of evidence and information to let us know that there's like a little surge right at the end of about like 14, 16 days, right when you sort of think you're out of the woods, cravings and urges come back. It is a fat soluble drug. So it's twice as hard for a female body to go through this. Nicotine and alcohol are water soluble drugs. That's why we can predict them a little bit better. But in this fat soluble drug, please know that we are more susceptible to cravings and relapse because of this notion. And then that negative reinforcement, it just means if post-acute withdrawal sucks, I'm just going to go ahead and return to the substance that I know makes it go away. We've talked vaping. I'm going to slip it in because I always have time and I never, ever leave any kind of an athletic environment and not talk about it. Y'all, it's the same. And the tobacco industry is still taking us for a ride as young people. So I tell them, if you don't know what's in your juice, go look it up. It's the exact same chemicals as an analog cigarette, and they are still taking you for a ride. And young people hate being taken advantage of. Same chemicals, just because it smells like blueberries now and watermelon doesn't mean that it doesn't have the exact same chemicals coming into your lungs. We have less endurance, we recover slowly, we are weaker, and we have more injuries than the non-smoking peers, all evidence-based. I also do the caveat really quickly to talk about the interaction of drugs. Some drugs are additive, so 1 + 1 is 2. Some drugs are synergistic, 1 + 1 is 11. And cannabis and alcohol together is that synergistic effect. The young people will call it being crossed or faded. In research, we call it simultaneous use of alcohol and marijuana. But y'all, if you sample and ask if they've babysat somebody that's been crossed, you're going to get a lot of hands raised. But this is the experience. Remember now, acute withdrawal, 2 to 3 hours, but the longer withdrawal, the refracted, is that 6 to 8 hours. They have babysat somebody that's been crossed, dizzy, nauseated, extreme paranoia, hallucinate, like disconnect from reality. So this is a really if you thought being blacked out was one thing, being faded is a very different one. Ask the young people about it. Athletes, as a regular, like, nod and say that they've been through this. So that's when we cross alcohol. Now, remember too, cannabis is going to help us with there's those CB1 receptors that are in our gut. So when we're having honest conversations, athletes will also let me know that that's what it helps with, is their pre-performance anxiety. A lot of athletes are gut-based, right? Like, if I feel calm and collected in my stomach, then I'm going to play well. And so to me, that's why a lot of athletes are using, is just to calm our entire bodies down to try to perform better. But when alcohol, right, and cannabis go together, alcohol is going to increase that absorption of THC. And if my gut if it helps with nausea and I drink too much, the way to get rid of alcohol, right, is to throw it up. So if I cannot get rid of my alcohol, I'm now high and drunk for many, many hours. And you're not going to get a face that doesn't know what you're talking about when you're talking to young people. I want to belabor the fact, but I won't. CBD is positioned on our brains and our bodies, especially as athletes, as a supplement and a nutraceutical these days. So I'm going to slip past these 3 slides just to let you know that it's how it's getting into our life. There is a very dangerous part for toxicity and reproductive male toxicity for sperm count. The only ones that we're using in sport, and y'all are going to hear it through the MLB, this NSF is what we use in sport to say it's certified sport. It's that it's clean and pure, is that the product that you're getting is what's in front of you and what's in the jar. But I tell people, even if it's sort of clean and it is what it is, it's still going to have an impact on your performance. Drug interactions, male toxicity. Also, especially as athletes, sometimes we have a small window for starting a family, for doing family planning in the off season. And so if you're thinking about starting a family, I tell both partners to get off THC and CBD because it will help. This has been belabored. So just know that these are the things that we can intervene with. The age of onset, when we use, the very first use, the frequency of our use, and the intensity of our use. If we can change any of those factors, and that's what I talk about every day. If you are drinking 151, let's try to get you down to high noon. You won't be as hungover, right? And so we talk about potency a lot when it comes to cannabis, is a little bit of that, just like all pathways approach to recovery is what can we do? When can we do it? Is it in season or off season? But we start to have these conversations. How much is too much? When is too often too much? When does it get in the way? This is the DSM criteria. And I talk about that has anybody ever asked them to slow down or stop? I love being that provider. That's criteria number 2 is I'm going to ask you to stop. Because if 10 people can like drink or use and 9 people can drink or use at ease, that's general addiction rates. One person's going to drink or use diseased. That's probably the person I'm talking to. So we know that the culture of sport and substance go together. We didn't know how to do a lot of these substances before we got to sport. We didn't drink this way. We probably didn't binge drink in the way until we got onto our teams. So just kind of addressing that. This is the most benign way that I can have a conversation. And so literally the questions that I've come up with as a provider: do you use any mind mood altering substances? Like all the way down to caffeine and tobacco and nicotine. What type? Tell me the strain, tell me the potency, what's going on. What does it help you do? That's the one that I stop. And then if it causes problems, would you be willing to stop? Sorry, he's going to cut me off. It's like the night at the Apollo. But we try to do skills, and listen to this. This is my so what, like learn about cravings and urges, understand even urge surfing. Athletes get this. Just try some sober breathing. If you think like, just teach them some basic skills to make it through some of the biology of withdrawal. Any way to get them to a better place of performance, try it. Take a tea break. If y'all know what that's cool, it's a tolerance break. We have dry January, right? We have a lot of challenges in athletics where, catch 100 balls every day and somebody will do it. But I want you to be the provider or the coach or the mom that stands in front of them. It's like, hey, if it's not a big deal, put it down. There is a free journal and he will walk you through the days of making it through a tolerance break. But that's all we're going to do. We're going to have some conversations. We're going to use facts, not fear. Track and compare. It's the best way that athletes love to respond to it. Because if I'm good, I want to get better, and better gets best. And by the time that I'm competing at this level, I'm competing against myself. So try a period of sobriety, try a challenge. Marijuana's Anonymous is a great group to just drop in on and just educate. Say that. Oh, I did it. Not a lot of room for questions and answers. That's kind of my style. But where do you want me to go?
Well, thank you very much, LaTisha. That was an outstanding presentation as usual. I've got a question. If you look at young people that you're trying to reach and athletes, when you realize that probably less than 1% of these kids are actually going to reach, a Division I or for that matter, professional. How do you reach the kid that idolizes these people, that sees the culture within a lot of these sports teams that kind of accept marijuana use? So how do you reach that child that's not going to be that professional athlete or Division I athlete? And what do you say to them?
Well, if y'all don't know that, there's actually Canna athletes. There are athletes sponsored by cannabis companies. And one of the most famous ones will actually tell you that he cuts out cannabis prior to competing. Even as a Canna athlete, it's literally who's sponsoring his name. And so I think about that. That's when I go back to that perception part. And I say, look, whatever makes the news, okay. But I have to be honest, when those athletes are trying to stay on the field, right? They are taking the best care of their bodies that they possibly can. They are sleeping the most, nutrition, they are dialed in. And I said, if an athlete is using it, I would be concerned why they're using it. Right. And I think about that. And at the end of the day, okay, that's what I said. If they're using it for recovery, they use like this much. That's the other thing too, is that we always get the kind of news version that's like, I smoked 2 blunts before the game and I was there and I was fine. But the truth is, we know the individuals, and I say this lovingly, we often know the individuals that struggle with substance use to excess. And they get reputations, they call them, y'all, and we lose commas and zeros because we're behavior problems or we have off-field issues. That's actually the code for it. I literally know an athlete that cost themselves $250,000. We don't have this money to talk about here, but $250,000 for a positive UA. That's a decision-making problem, not necessarily a drug use problem. So I tell younger athletes where I'm like, hey, idolize them, everything. And I was like, and if you're eating the same way they are and you're sleeping the same way they are and they're practicing the same way, right? Is just notice if you want to make good, better, and better best, there's some things that are slowing them down. And this is no joke, and y'all can hear me. I'm like, and at the very end of the day, some of these people are freaks, like elite. I know an athlete that can literally eat 5 bags of sugar and still go win national championships. And he can do that when he was 22. I also know him and he's 45. He does not eat that way now. My super favorite thing, and I still have your attention, I got to talk to an NFL player that turned to a coach, then that turned to like a player's advocate. And I knew he used during the league. And so I walked up there and I was like, man, do you still smoke? I know you have a family and everything. He's like, no, I don't use anymore. And I'm like, he had the exact same injuries. And now you're 10, 15 years past the league. And he looked around like if there was a drug deal going on. And he was like, Troy Aikman took me to yoga. And I'm like, what? And he goes, that helped way more than me sitting on the couch smoking. And he's like, I was way more flexible. He said, and I asked him the year he started doing different things to recover. And he sustained his career for 3 or 4 more years after that. So we just talk commas and zeros sometimes and just basic decision making. When I'm talking to coaches a lot, I said, maybe our athletes don't have a substance use problem, but they have a decision making problem right now. Right. So I hope that was a really long, circuitous way to answer that.
That's a great answer. I got one more question that I like to ask you smart people here that, if you look at cannabis use disorder and if it was an iceberg, how much of it are we actually seeing above the water right now with respect to mental health and physical consequences to individuals? How much of that is actually visible above the water, do you think, in your mind?
Oh my gosh, thank you you teed it up, and I'm going to steal that from you. So what is happening is that we're not asking the right questions. We are seeing the impact of mental health. We are seeing more anxious athletes. We are seeing injuries, but we're not asking the right questions. So whenever somebody comes in, I have sports medicine people that once I give them the criteria for cannabis withdrawal, they're like, and I'm like, I know you diagnosed them with a mental health problem, with like a anxiety. And I was like, it's not anxiety, it's withdrawal. So I think often right now, especially in the sport realm, we are misdiagnosing just basic cannabis use, the impact of cannabis and cannabis withdrawal. I think the iceberg is staring at us, but we're often, I think, mislabeling it as something else.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Oh my God, that's beautiful. No, I think we're asking the wrong questions, or we're not asking.
Well, outstanding as usual. Dr. Bader, we appreciate your time.
And thank y'all so much.
And expertise. And again, thank you so very much.